Hey everyone, welcome to this weekly Sidereal Astrology forecast for the week of June 9th through the 15th of 2025. All right, so a very important week astrologically. First of all, we have a full moon early in the week on Tuesday and Wednesday. This is going to be in the healing constellation of Ophiuchus, which is all about now becoming more aware of the deeper dimensions of ourself and perhaps doing some healing with that, maybe some reintegration, maybe some shadow work, anything that's going to help us essentially redeem the lost or exiled parts of ourself in order to come to more of a whole self, more of our whole self, more redeemed, more transformed, more healed as a result. So the full moon will be opposite Jupiter. Jupiter's giving us some awareness with this, and it's going to be trining up to Mars, so there could be some motivation towards this as well. Now, earlier in the week, before we get to that full moon, we're going to have Venus squaring Pluto. There could be some deep things coming up here in our values and relationships in life. Mercury is going to be squaring up to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which is getting very close here, which is going to go exact next year. But very important collectively here. Maybe some things to be taking a little bit seriously involving maybe communication, maybe correspondence, and learning as well. This is actually a really good time for that, as we do have Mercury and Jupiter now in Gemini to be curious and learning, but maybe some challenging of ourselves to do that leading up to the full moon. And then the week ends with that Jupiter squaring up to Saturn, Mars squaring up to Uranus. So a lot of squares this week. Squares are really about integration. They're really about taking action, and they end up being very constructive phases of the year. And in this case, this is a very important week of the year. But anyways, at the weekend, really finalizing things maybe as far back as August of last year. Anything we wanted to build towards, work towards, we can see some perhaps nice steps in the right direction with that actually. And with the Uranus square, maybe a little bit of erratic energy, maybe feeling a bit impulsive, maybe a bit rash. Good to be a little bit intentional with our actions, with our motivations, and with our drives over the weekend with that square between Mars and Uranus. All right, so let's go and take a look at all of this here in more detail when we return. Alrighty, so here's the sky for this week. We're going to look at this for each day of the week, starting first with Monday, June 9th. And as you can see here, we are using the visible sky on this channel, which is very different from mainstream astrology. If you're new to this, you'll see how the constellations are different sizes. This is how our ancestors came up with them or corresponded with them or noticed the synchronicities with them. And so we are taking this into account, the actual size of the constellations as we see the planets in the night sky. And so if you are new to this, and especially if you notice some of the placements are different, like maybe you're expecting the sun to be in Gemini right now. But in fact, if you do look up at the sun or using a planetarium software like this rather, you will see the sun right in the middle of Taurus. And so very different. If you're new to this, definitely check out that link down below for more information. Okay, so let's definitely do a recap because we've already had a lot of sign changes last week. And so this week is a very different energy than what we've been normally working with. So first of all, the sun, yes, is still in Taurus. It's still the time of the year to be focused on cultivating our resources. Okay, so this is our inner resources like self-worth, self-value, self-efficacy, the belief in ourselves, and our external resources as well. The material world, maybe the natural world, maybe the more sensual world, right? Getting more into the cultivation of these resources. So this is the main focus. This is what's really good to still be cultivating in this lunar month, particularly since the past 2 weeks when we started this lunar cycle here. Now, Mercury has recently shifted into Gemini, where he's at home, quite still close to Jupiter. So there is a lot more communicative energy. There's a lot more mental energy to be used. Gemini is all about being more curious, more interested in general, and willing to exchange in life, whether it's learning through books or self-study or courses, or through others as well. Again, exchanging with others, maybe even more practical things like business and trade can actually be quite emphasized now too. So this is all actually getting expanded for the next year, as Jupiter is expanding this for a year, but it's highly activated right now with Mercury. Now Venus has finally left watery Pisces and is now closer to Aries. And so this week, when it comes to our enjoyments and our relationships, there's more of a fiery energy, okay? It's coming out of the more murkier, uncertain, going with the flow, receptive, spiritual energies when it comes to those enjoyments and relationships, and now heading into a much more active, direct, and assertive energy with that. So really good to be enjoying the more assertive, active, direct energies of life, but also to be connecting in our relationships in this way as well. Probably noticing themes more around action or directness or self-expression when it comes to those one-to-one connections, all relationships, all one-on-one agreements, all one-on-one dealings in general there, a little more fire. Now, speaking of fire and self-expression, Mars is well set in Leo, and so it is a great time to be very direct, very motivated, very assertive with that self-expression. And so anything that's about putting energy towards matters of the heart, towards interests, towards passions, towards fun, playfulness, creative energy, right? Letting out this expressive side of ourselves is still really good. And so this has been already a continuation from last week, but certainly a lot of fire energy to be worked with there. So we do have quite a bit of fire. Venus and Mars, the interpersonal planets. These are both the interpersonal planets, deal a lot with relating with others. They're in fire signs right now. Mercury, which is the kind of glue that holds all those together, but also our sort of perspective on life, is in Gemini, which is, again, the more interested and practical. And this is all being very held together by the sun in grounded Taurus, okay, which is all about taking that more resourceful approach to life, and what we would say is that slow and steady approach to life as well. Okay, so like I said, this is a week of squares, and squares are traditionally challenging, but the way I read them is that they're really good to be challenging of ourselves, and it's usually times where we are, depending on the individual, more willing to take those actions and move things forward and implement. So it can be an extremely constructive week, especially because a lot of these aspects are involving collective planets, yearly planets like Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune, and Pluto earlier in the week. But nonetheless, it's an important week to be really challenging of ourselves. Now, again, the highlight of the week is the fact that we're coming up to the halfway point of the lunar month, the full moon. And that's going to be late Tuesday, early Wednesday for most of us. Okay, so as we approach that, we're getting to the heightened energy of the lunar month. This is usually a time of more general energy, depending on personal charts, but generally more increasing of energy, more awareness, and where we then tend to make some shifts and changes. Now, before that, though, we do have these squares with Venus and Mercury. So first of all, Venus will be squaring up to Pluto on Monday. Venus, again, the planet of our values and relationships, squaring up to deep and transformative Pluto. So it's a really good day to practice things like depth, deep connections to life and to others, a willingness to get to the truth or uncover deep things within ourselves fundamentally. But as a result of this, this can translate into very positive changes to what we value and to our relationships as well. So willingness to dive deep really helps facilitate this. And Pluto is helping basically strip away all of the outworn, outdated, things that are no longer serving us, as they say, elements of these things, of our values and relationships. And so by being more non-attached like this, by being willing to dive deeper, it can help facilitate this shedding of the skin that Pluto helps us do. And as a result, much deeper connections, much deeper relationships, much deeper values. And so this all comes to our, of course, willingness to do this and challenging of ourselves to do this, but again, can be very constructive. Now, Mercury is squaring up to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So this is, again, a yearly energy, basically early next year. To be exact, February 20th of next year, Saturn and Neptune are going to conjoin. And this is very significant, as it's going to be a very positive step in the right direction in regards to building a life or careers or things we want to accomplish that are more attuned to our soul, that speak more to our soul fulfillment and are just really good for our spiritual or mental health in general. So we're starting to get the prelude of this as Saturn is now getting within a 1 degree orb of that conjunction. Now, they're not going to, again, go exact until early next year, but for the summertime, we're getting a bit of a sneak peek as to what early next year is building foundations with. So over these coming months, these next couple of months, good to be aware of, what are some of these perhaps things that are coming in that your soul's calling you to build. Maybe you think, is going to lead to more mental health, spiritual health, maybe some dreams, ideals, or intuitions about the future and what you want to cultivate, and maybe starting to feel that willingness to put in the work to make that happen. Great. These are very likely to be part of this conjunction, and we're starting to get acclimated to that, starting to get introduced to that now this week. So this starts with Mercury on Monday. Now, Mercury, again, the more mental and communicative planet, squaring up to this can mean that certainly it's good to be looking at things realistically. That's the square to Saturn. We don't want to look at things too realistically to where it becomes heavy thinking or dense, but to again challenge ourselves here. So to see the reality of our situation, we might be exposed to some cold hard truths or realities of our life around Monday, but again, the willingness to work on them for the future, for the long term, and perhaps in this yearly sense, can make this excellent and a really good day for all things mental and communicative that we do want to put that time and perseverance into. Now, the square to Neptune can disillusion us a little bit. It's a bit of that water energy. There can be a little bit of that uncertainty dealing with the squares, and sometimes a tendency to either want to escape or hide away, or a little apathetic on the other extreme. So with that watery energy, we want to again see, certainly the reality of things with Saturn, but at the same time, listen to our soul, to trust our soul, and to perhaps use Monday as a spiritual practice, as a time to connect with our souls, to connect to the spiritual dimensions of life, to challenge ourselves to have healthy peace and this energy, this connection to things greater than ourselves. Neptune helps us connect to whatever. The philosophy is not important, but it could be to life, it could be to God, it could be to the universe, whatever it is that's greater than ourselves, that we can be a little bit more receptive to, a little more willing to receive from. And so Monday, really good day to practice a little bit of that receptivity, a little bit of that willingness to go with the flow, a little bit of that willingness to connect to our soul, as that's again a big part of these new foundations that are being laid as well. Okay, so a lot going on here, but what I'll simplify as Monday is just a good day to challenge ourselves, both in terms of how we're viewing things in life and what we want on a soul level, as well as with the Venus side, maybe some of those deeper values that we can be willing to connect to deeply. All right, so that's Monday. Then again, as we start to get to that full moon, we'll likely already be feeling that. It's going to be late Tuesday for most of us. We do have a trine between Mars and Chiron. With all the other stuff going on, I'd say this is more minor, kind of going on in the background, but it's nice to see that there's some support with the healing energies, as we're going to now discuss with Ophiuchus. Mars trining the ruler of Ophiuchus, Chiron, gives us that support, I think, for some of the healing that's likely taking place here. Okay, so Tuesday, Wednesday, Ophiuchus Full Moon, illumination of the healing dimensions of life, helping us see what is going on a deeper level in life, in our life or life as a whole, but perhaps more importantly, to work with it, right? So Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer, is the one wielding a serpent, which is very symbolic for working with the deeper, what we could say is the more physical or instinctual aspects of life, right? So the serpent has always been symbolic for healing in ancient civilizations, and there's a reason for this, is that the serpent represents that most instinctual, basic, fundamental life energy, right? Where yes, there's fears around the serpent kind of energy. Yes, there's very, let's say, quote unquote, negative qualities around that side of ourself, certainly. So Ophiuchus represents the exiled parts, where we haven't embraced the serpent, where we haven't raised the serpent, we haven't befriended the serpent, because Ophiuchus is not fighting the serpent. Ophiuchus is working with it, wielding it. And this is how we want to work with those deeper qualities of ourself and of life. So a great time to be aware of that. Ophiuchus is said to be the redeemer, to redeem these deeper parts of ourself that we maybe don't like, we don't identify with, we see as negative. These are things to then embrace, to see as a part of ourself, as of course our true self is the full spectrum of life. And this includes these parts of ourself, right? The true self is the full spectrum. These shadow qualities, these qualities that we've exiled are still living in us. They're still in our unconscious. And it's times like this where we can become very much aware of them and willing to embrace them and work with those deeper sides of ourself and of life. So the full moon is going to help illuminate this for all of us and perhaps make some important shifts and changes in our life in order to further develop this. Now, to put this in a yearly sense, 6 months ago, we had the new moon here in this part of the sky. And so 6 months ago was the time of this now starting to get developed. So we can also say that it's a good time to reflect on the past 6 months in the context of healing, in the context of redemption, in the context of being willing to work with the deeper aspects of ourself and life. And as a result of that, making some very likely positive shifts in the right direction here earlier in the week to either close out the next 2 weeks of the lunar cycle or the next 6 months of the solar cycle as well. Okay, and as you can see, this is all opposite the Taurus energy, the Orion energy, which is activated right now. But with the sun in Taurus, this is really the axis of the shaman. We see the shaman. The shaman is, of course, the healer, like Ophiuchus, being willing to dive deep. But notice what the shaman focuses on. The shaman doesn't so much focus on healing as much as the shaman focuses on the earth and the natural and the physical world. And so this is what Taurus reminds us, that in order to do all that deeper stuff, healing, whatever, we need to be grounded in our own self-worth, our own self-value. We need to be grounded in nature, maybe even utilize nature, connect to nature in order to facilitate that healing, as we could say that nature is the healer. But anyways, it's a time to balance out this polarity between the physical and the deeper, the physical and the spiritual, the earth and the healing elements. And anything around this level is absolutely fantastic to be working on. Like I said, it is going to be opposite Jupiter, so there's definitely some insights coming in with Jupiter now in Gemini, maybe some very practical insights, some perspectives that can be very valuable with this. And like we saw earlier with not only Mars and Chiron, but Mars is trining this as well. Again, giving that support with Mars to be motivated and driven to get to maybe the truth of the deeper aspects, or to, again, be willing to heal with this one as well. Okay, so I would say that this is probably the most important thing of the week, even though we have a lot of yearly energy, and it makes this week very important in a yearly sense. Okay, so coming off of that full moon, just a little minor thing. Mercury will be sextiling Venus, nothing major here, but maybe a little bit of a ease coming off of the full moon in order to communicate, in order to learn, in order to do some of that Mercury stuff, and maybe also some of that Venus stuff. We'll probably feel more healed and transformed from some of that deeper stuff with Venus, maybe those values and relationships from earlier in the week. All right, and then as we go through the rest of the week, it's going to be about implementing the full moon insights for the next 2 weeks. The moon will be in Sagittarius for the bulk of the rest of the week up until late Saturday. So this whole second part of the week, really good to expand our horizons a bit, coming off of that deeper energy. And this is the cycle of things, right? After the deeper energy, after the cocoon, after the healing, we go into the more free-spirited, right? The butterfly out of the cocoon. And so it makes it a really good post-full moon for philosophy, spirituality, adventure, feeling more free-spirited, and again, very likely feeling more healed as a result of all this. That leads to a little bit more of that open-mindedness, adventurousness, and free-spiritedness that Sagittarius is all about. Okay, and then the next squares of the week are at the very weekend. On Sunday, the moon will shift into Capricorn, suggesting that late Saturday and Sunday is just a good time for a bit of that patience, perseverance, responsibility that Capricorn, and even in this case Saturn, who's activated, are all about. But here it's Jupiter squaring Saturn. This is actually completing an energy that's been going on since August of last year. I would say late this week, early next week. Great to think back from as far back as August of last year. I mean, technically as far back as 2020, if you really want to go back that far, because 2020 we had Jupiter and Saturn conjunct, and that was the beginning of the cycle. And now, this year since August, we've been in the first challenges of that to implement and integrate those new beginnings of 2020. But this is the final culmination of these integrations, the final culmination of these actions since August. And so anything that you want to set intentions with on this timely level, great, but also in the sense that it's just a really good time to be open to solidifying things. These are both the manifestation planets. Jupiter is the perspective of belief. It's the philosophy of believe it and it can become true. And then Saturn is the perspective of refinement and work and patience. And so this is the belief that if you want something in life, you have to be patient and persevere. Both philosophies are equally important, but it's about integrating them. And so to be open-minded, yet grounded, to be willing to see what's possible at the same time to actually implement what's needed in order to make that a reality. And these two are really have been already really helping us do that. But again, as you can see, it's really about solidifying manifestations in general and regarding these timelines of 2020 and since August. Okay, and then Mars is squaring up to Uranus. So a bit of an erratic energy here. Sometimes with this, we can be a little bit impulsive, maybe a little bit rash with things. So a good weekend to be mindful of that side that probably wants some freedom, probably wants some changes, and maybe needs to, all of us can be a little bit more flexible. And so this aspect usually teaches us a little bit more flexibility to, yes, listen to our excitement, listen to our true self, but at the same time to be open to being a little more adaptive to things, right? To challenge our own status quo in order to go about things. So to go about things a little bit differently, to be open to experimentation, to be open to trying things out differently, to be open to seeing things from a different angle, different perspective, to challenge, our own status quo or the collective status quo as well. But again, with that intentionally doing that can make this, again, very constructive. It's really helping us connect more to our true self, but in a way that's grounded and how do you say, just more balanced, because Mars tends to be coming out of the gates quite hot. And, Uranus, can really activate that because they're both very high frequency energies. So we just want to make sure that, of course, that our actions and our drives and our motivations are in alignment with our intentional selves, with our true self. And it's nothing that we're just reacting to, and we're more responding to things. And in this way, then we can respond in a way that is, yes, more alignment to our true self, yes, listening to our excitement, but in more balanced and constructive sorts of ways. Okay? So good to be flexible there over the weekend, I would say, with both of these. All right, everyone. So that's the week in a nutshell. I'm looking at this as very constructive. I think this is going to be a week that we can all say is going to be very positive steps for the yearly energy. We've got that full moon Tuesday, Wednesday, helping us gain awareness of what really can be reintegrated with ourselves in life, or just be reintegrated with life in general. What can we accept more about life or others or ourselves that leaves us feeling more whole, more full, more of our true self, more connected to the full spectrum of who we are, and perhaps doing some of that mental, emotional, spiritual, or physical healing to help facilitate that. Now, leading up to that, we've got some of the squares here. Good to be, again, looking at things realistically with this square to Saturn, at the same time connect to our soul, at the same time be willing to dive deep with things in a way that we're really seeing the real raw truth of things and connecting to things a little bit more on that deeper level there, again, intentionally. And then as we're coming off of that, we'll start to implement that full moon energy, and then we come up to the weekend of starting to solidify probably things as far back as August of last year, starting to work towards maybe some things that we want to cultivate early next year in regards to the soul-guided stuff, and just practicing a little bit of flexibility at whatever life throws at us over the weekend, or whatever we throw at ourselves over the weekend, because this can be a very good time to see how we can have a little bit more of a freedom yet intentional approach to life, a little bit more flexibility while still listening to what we want in life. All right, everyone. So I hope everyone has a great week. Hope everyone found this helpful. If you want to get more insights into this weekly energy, or you have some questions, or you want to connect to the community, we go live every Sunday at 1:15 p.m. Eastern Time on YouTube. You can find the link to that at the newsletter on the website, MTZ Insiders, or by simply going to the YouTube channel and going to the live section. But I hope to see you all there. That's going to be probably here in just a few hours after this upload. And have a great week, everyone. And I'll see you all next time for the next astrology forecast. Take care.